we're going to go to South Carolina. I want to talk about Collin Murray-Boyles, who, if I was to sum it up as a person who is not as in-depth into this, Raf, I would say he's like an undersized defensive forward who maybe or plays center, but is he big enough? And the idea is always, Draymond Green. But where's the offense and where's the shooting? Is that like a representation, broad strokes of what Murray-Boyles sort of is?
Yeah, I mean the word overrated is kind of strong.
Yeah.
I'm probably more comfortable saying I'm a little bit lower on him than the consensus, and you just kind of pointed out the reasons. I mean, Draymond Green is a one of one. Like, it's tough to find a Draymond Green comparison, and so it's kind of like. I mean, this may be a bad example, but I remember at one point teams were looking for the next Dirk, right? And then you had guys that got drafted pretty high because they were European and they were tall and they could shoot. But there's only one Dirk, right? And so I think with Draymond, it's definitely difficult to find someone that is similar to him because you got to have one, the body type, but just the IQ. And then there's things like Draymond has that are just like these intangibles, these leadership intangibles, even though, I think it's fair if you think he's a terrible leader in a sense, because he is a little hands-on from time to time. But Draymond has so many different ways that he's able to impact the game, even if he scores 6 points and has 6 rebounds and 4 assists. So that's why I think it's hard to compare. I think with Boyles, I love him on the college level. I think on the college level, he's just an absolute mismatch. I mean, he's too big for smaller guys. And then if you put a bigger guy on him, he has enough face-up game and enough handle to get to his spots on the floor. I mean, there's a game against Johni Broome where he just absolutely dominated him for a half. I just don't know how it scales up to the NBA because on one hand, I don't want to just always put guys in boxes as 3-and-D, vertical lob threat, stretch 4, and so on. But he's a guy that just doesn't fit neatly into a box. He measured at like 6'6", doesn't space the floor. I think he made just 14 jump shots all season. So he's kind of tricky to not necessarily build around, but just tricky to have lineups that fit around his skill set. So you probably need to have like a stretch 5. Which means you probably need to have a stretch 5 that can protect the rim and space the floor, where those guys are hard to find. So I think he's just a difficult guy to evaluate for me, one of the hardest guys all year.
Yeah, look, I think one of those things you said in there about like you love him at a college level already just is better than everybody else. He's able to be stronger and more aware and in position better than these guys and cook them. But you get to the NBA and it's obviously a very different sort of a scenario where you're right. Like people fall into these traps, and I'm sure you've been guilty of it, and I've been guilty of it as well. As you throw out these one-of-one type stories, these development. Oh, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, yeah, cool. That happens once. Like happens with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Kawhi Leonard becoming an unbelievable shooter when he couldn't shoot at all, and turning into this all defensive guy who's a 40% three-point shooter. Like, okay, that's cool, but that's happened once. And yeah, Draymond Green, it's happened once. And trying to put these guys in that spot. Now, people would argue that someone like this where you go, he's tough to evaluate, he's tough to put in a box. That's great. You want the outlier type players. But often these sort of guys who have this domination at college and put up these numbers, like his defensive numbers are really strong. Obviously, the shooting's not good. But like, I know these aren't the same players, but an undersized center who put up great numbers in college a couple of years ago, Trace Jackson-Davis, right? He did all these things. You go, look how good he is. He's killing these guys. These numbers are fantastic. He's a little bit undersized as center, but I don't know if he should. And like now he's barely played this season. He slipped all the way to the end of the second round. Again, I'm not saying they're the same players, but you've heard similar arguments about him coming out of the draft. And even a guy that I talked about on my show yesterday, I think it was, like I don't remember who it was, but maybe it was Asen Ewell, I want to say, for example, just a guy with all these, look at his defensive numbers. Yeah, okay, but does it make sense when you get into the NBA? Is there anything you see with Murray-Boyles? With the shooting, like 71 from the line is not bad. Like, can he be reliable? Can he be respected, I guess, as a shooter?
It's going to take a while. I mean, I was at the combine and he didn't look like he was a good shooter. I think for him, it's just a tricky evaluation. And I love the fact that you brought up Trace Jackson-Davis. And Jackson-Davis, right now, the Golden State Warriors list him at 6'9".
Okay.
And he's undersized. And Murray-Boyles is 6'6". In shoes, he might be 6'8". at best. And so, and then even then, like you look at what Trace Jackson did in college, I mean, he was dominant. Like, I mean, his numbers were incredible. Like his last 2 years or so. So I don't even know if that is a good comparison. I'm just looking at the numbers. Trace Jackson Davis was 20 and 11 and 4 assists per game his last year at Indiana. Collin Murray-Boyles, like I said, he's just difficult for me. Another thing that I feel like hasn't been talked about enough, and I don't want this to seem like it's just an episode where I'm bashing him, is I've never seen a guy play on a team that was as bad as Murray-Boyles, and it's never mentioned. Like we've seen guys where they say, even like Anthony Edwards was the #1 pick. I don't know if he's a winner. I mean, his team didn't win. You talk about with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. Well, their team was 15 and 17. Well, South Carolina was even worse than that, and it's not mentioned. So I just think like for the guys that are like all into the analytics and they find that there's things that support why you can be high on Murray-Boyles, but I just feel like there's some things that just have not been mentioned because he's kind of like the analytics darling or one of the analytics darlings of this class, despite the fact that he doesn't shoot.
Yeah, like that becomes interesting because there is that, like, analytics is a broad term that can be put into many different ways. You go, well, look at the defensive numbers and look at this, but there are things that's like, okay, but analytics also be like, well, you're not shooting, and so how are you creating space, and do you need to be on a team where you're the #5 offensive option, and do you play as a reserve, and then how does that work if there's not other usage guys who are efficient in that group? And that's that sort of problem with these guys is like, again, we can go back to Draymond. Draymond works because he starts and he plays with these elite other offensive options, but if Draymond was a bench player playing 23 minutes a night, his offensive limitations will be much more of a problem. You'd have to create all these weird staggers to get the right guys on the floor with him at the right time because it doesn't work otherwise if he's not surrounded by the correct players and they haven't built it the right way. And so many of these guys have failed in that type of scenario. So to me, like well, let's say I've seen him. Murray-Boyles be projected as high as 5 or 6 in drafts. Do you have him as a lottery guy, like outside top 10? Well, what sort of player do you think, or range do you think he should be in?
I don't think he's a lottery guy, but I could see him going high in the lottery. But he's also a guy that I wonder how does it look for him in workouts? Like it has to be like the 3-on-3 type workouts where he's going to shine. I think if you put him in like 1-on-none shooting drills, I don't know if you're going to be too impressed with that. But he does have a good body of work or a good resume on the floor in games, other than the fact that South Carolina was like 12 and 20 this year. So I get why some teams are high on him. But for me, I just there's two things that work against him is that he's undersized and he doesn't space the floor. And I just don't know the best fit for him. And even with Draymond, I think with Draymond's like intangibles as a leader and a guy that pushes people, I've actually seen it with my own eyes. I mean, I've seen Draymond play pickup basketball with 4 non-NBA guys, and they beat a team of 5 NBA players because Draymond pointed out where everybody was at. He pointed out everybody's weakness. He worked the refs to make sure that his player got a foul call on the next end when he barely got touched. There's so many little things that Draymond does that do not show up in the stat sheet. And Murray-Boyles could get to that level, but I just don't know.